all starts in the womb.
I am an alcoholic. My home group is the Thursday night study group in Fort Lauderdale.
Sweet.
And my name is Brian.
Brian.
That's a thing we do on Thursday nights. So I don't. Yeah, no, we don't do nice. We do sweet. Nice is another group entirely. Yeah. Nothing against that group. It's just nice was taken, so we do sweet. Glad to be here. Happy Friday. Happy Labor Day. Welcome to the gentlemen that are new. I'm gonna cover some ground in the first few steps because, well, for two reasons really. One, it's really for three reasons. The best reason is for anybody who hasn't been here for the first 4 weeks, then they get caught up to at least a little bit to where we are. It's kind of hard talking about step 5 out of context, so we're going to put it in context. And the second reason, now I forget what the third one was, so now you know what you're dealing with. I'm surprised I keep getting asked to do these things, to be honest with you. But the second reason is it takes me a couple of minutes to get to shake the nerves off. I've spoken a lot in the time that I've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've never done so and not been nervous. So it takes me at least a couple of minutes to just, get unnervous. This is a strange thing we actually ask people to do in AA. It really is. We come into AA, we're going to talk a little bit about allergy of the body, obsession of the mind. We learn that we're powerless, and the AA solution is a spiritual awakening, and the third step starts pointing us towards the real problem being selfishness and self-centeredness. And the rest of the steps are really about, just almost completely about, removing, as if that were possible, removing selfishness and self-centeredness, right? As if that were actually an attainable goal, right? But the rest of the steps really are about reducing that, the disturbances caused by selfishness and self-centeredness. And as part of our therapy, in our efforts to reduce selfishness and self-centeredness, we ask each other to stand at the podium and talk about ourselves for an hour. It just seems a strange thing to do. Right? That's what we're doing here. So, and again, I sometimes wonder whether it's wise to have me do this, because I am definitely on the slow side of things. So I did realize finally, I noticed the signs over here on the wall the first week. I mentioned them. It wasn't until last week, which would have been the fourth time seeing those signs, the fourth time being in this room ever, that I noticed that the first one sort of curses and the second one asks us not to. That was completely lost on me until last week. And it took till 5 weeks. It took 5 weeks of looking at those signs to realize that they just keep making a circle. It's circular logic there. If you really look at those two signs, there's just a circular logic going on. Are you sure you still want me to do this, Ed? I'm trying to talk you out of it. So we don't, I'm not even interested in doing step 5. I'm okay talking about it with you, but I'm not interested in confession. I'm not interested in doing that. So we're starting off just being honest. I'm not interested. I don't really want to do it. But there's a reason I do it, and there's a reason that I've done it, and there's a reason that I continue to do it. And that reason has everything in the world to do with the first step. Because when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was absolutely powerless over alcohol. I didn't even know what that meant. It wasn't for a little while till I heard somebody talking about the doctor's opinion in a big book study. And I'm sitting there listening to these two old timers go through the big book, starting with the doctor's opinion, which, of course, I have a big book and I've been tasked to read it many times by my sponsor. Most of the time, I don't do what I'm tasked to do. And never, ever, ever, ever would I start before page 1 in a book. That's just What is that? Like, you want to read a table of contents? Really? And in the big book, the doctor's opinion becomes before page 1, so I would never read it. But the doctor's opinion is where the first step is really explained and defined. Allergy of the body, obsession of the mind. That alcoholics, when they take a drink, their body reacts with a physical craving, demanding more. And that their mind insists that they keep taking that first one. And when I heard that explained, I went, holy cow. I'll try. I'm an alcoholic. And I had been a member of AA for some time. And for the first time, I understood that I was an alcoholic. And for the first time, I understood that I was screwed. Because that's really what it means to admit that you're powerless over alcohol, is to admit that you're screwed. Like, I'm stuck. I cannot stop drinking something that I can't control once I start, and my life is just going to continue to spiral out of control. Once I understood that that was my condition, and then you explained the spiritual experience as the solution to that experience, for some reason or other, I was in a way that I wasn't until I understood that. I just was. I had been going to meetings. I had a sponsor. I had a home group. I was doing all kinds of stuff in AA. But it wasn't until I got crystal clear about the fact that I was going to die, that this was serious business. That even me, as I'd been in AA for as long as I'd been in AA, knew that I was going to drink again unless I had this spiritual experience. And I knew I hadn't had one. And I believed in God, but my problem was, and that's really the second step. My problem really was that I thought that what the second step was about was believing in God. It is warm in here, isn't it? Did they ever turn the air down in here? I thought the second, so when the second step said came to believe. I mean, that's how my wife gets me to turn the air down. I don't know, figure maybe it'll work with Ed. I cracked me up.
And then it got so much worse.
And then were you trying to help me find my place? Wow, I'm really off base now. So when you told me that the second step was came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, I thought, oh, okay, no big deal. I believe in God. Done. So I was saying that I was powerless when I didn't understand what powerless meant, and so I had done the first step. I was saying that I had done the second step because I believed in God when I got here, and so I had already done the second step. And by the way, I've already done an altar call also. So in my mind, I've already done the third step as well. You hear what's happening here, right? I think I know stuff. I'm interpreting the program of Alcoholics Anonymous through the lens of stuff that I already know, and I have the mind of a chronic alcoholic, right? That mind's filter is going to kill me, right? But everything that I'm hearing in AA, I'm filtering through this lens of stuff I already know. And it wasn't until I admitted that I was absolutely powerless that I started hearing you in a different way. All of a sudden, now I understood I was missing something, and that if I didn't listen carefully, and if I didn't follow directions carefully, I was going to die. And I don't know, and literally, all of a sudden I had it. I understood that I was going to die if this didn't happen. And so I listened and participated in a way I had never done before. The first step, powerlessness. The second step isn't really about believing in God. It's about giving up how you have it. Whatever it is that you think about this subject, God and your relationship to God and the universe around you, whatever it is that you think you already know about that, we're not saying you're wrong, because that would be dangerous, right? Because a lot of people come to Alcoholics Anonymous with religious convictions, and in AA, all of that is welcome. I was one of those, and I wasn't getting it. Right? And so what ended up having to happen is I had to be willing. I would have to be wrong about any of my religious beliefs. I just had to be willing to set it aside and listen differently. Listen for something else. I just had to be willing to put down what I thought that I already knew and just listen to what you were suggesting and follow those suggestions in the hopes that I too could have a spiritual experience. Because I believed in God and hadn't had a spiritual experience. I thought I had, but once I heard the definition of spiritual experience, like ideas and attitudes and emotions that were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men were cast to one side and a completely new set of conceptions and motives began to dominate them, that wasn't my experience, right? I did not have a complete change in who I was. And that doesn't even, I don't even mean to discount all of my spiritual or religious training up to that point, because in some small way, how I was participating in believing in a power greater than myself had me in action in AA long enough to find out that I was powerless and I need to listen differently. So even the what I now consider erroneous beliefs and ideas I had about AA kept me here long enough that some miracle was able to happen. So I don't even mean to discount that. The third step is a decision to do the rest of the steps thoroughly. That's what the third step is. The third step is this turning point in this whole program. I'm powerless. Spiritual experience is the answer. Here are the steps we took. Are you in or are you out? That's the third step. And it's not just that. I like to think of the third step as a decision to go through the rest of the steps. It's a little bit more than that. And that little bit is probably a big deal. The little bit more than that is it's a decision to go through with the 12 steps with the intention of receiving direction for my life from God. That's really the third step, or a higher power, if you prefer. That's the third step decision. And it would be silly to work the 12 steps and receive direction from a power greater than myself if I wasn't going to follow the direction that I found. Because it would be like pointless to find God's will and just not do it. That would be stupid, right? So the third step is the intention of going through the 12 steps to find direction for my life from God with the intention of applying it to the best of my ability. That's really what the third step is. The third step becomes one of these steps that I have to practice. There's the first step and the second step are like one-time steps. Right? I get information about what alcoholism is, and I decide for myself whether or not I'm an alcoholic. I am done. I come to believe that a power greater than myself. I get information about AA's solution, a spiritual experience is the answer. I either believe that that's possible for me or I don't. It's done. The third step is the first step that I have to practice on a regular basis. And the third step gets... Because the third step is the decision that I make to do even the fifth step, which is where we are tonight, even though I would prefer not to. Right? But by doing the rest of these steps as often as the program has asked me to, well, almost as often as the program has asked me to be honest, is a decision to use the 12 steps in order to receive direction for my life from God, with the clear intention of following it when I find it, right? That's still the carrying out of that decision. So the third step is actually being practiced all the time. The third step gets a bad rap sometimes in the conversation that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous, because there's a thing that I hear in AA all the time that I like to speak to. As a person who is very imperfect. If this program has taught me anything, it's taught me that I'm not here sober a long time or living a great life because I deserve it, or because I'm, really good at spirituality, or that like the stuff that I made up about who wins in AA, like the monks win and people like me lose. Like the stuff that I make up about what this is about is turned on its head, because I've gotten to stay here a really long time and I feel like I'm as imperfect as they come in even how I practice the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. To be honest, this will probably get me disinvited. I'm much better at talking about the 12 steps than I am at practicing the 12 steps, to be perfectly honest. We often, when we find these imperfections, when we find ourselves going astray from what the program has asked us to do, we often characterize that as taking our will back. I disagree. I think that it's normal for us to find selfishness within ourselves and find ourselves turning away from things that we know we shouldn't have been doing, or turning towards things that we know we shouldn't be doing. I mean, I think it's normal. As a matter of fact, I look at the very fact that, like, the thing that has me say I took my will back is the recognition of some character trait, some thought or action or attitude that I have that I believe is opposed to God's will in that moment, right? How do I recognize that without a desire to seek and do God's will? I don't even recognize that without the fact that I've turned my will and my life over to the care of God, and that I'm committed to working these 12 steps as a way of receiving direction from Him for my life. Without that, I don't even see that. And that was my life prior to Alcoholics Anonymous. The very next step after 3 was 4, where we started to catalog just exactly where and how I'm selfish, right? It's my sponsor can point out how selfish I am, or how dishonest I am, or how self-seeking I am, but it never seems to really register in here until I wrote it on paper and looked at it and said, oh, wow, which reminds me of, and it's because of that fact. It's because of that fact that people in AA never change the way that you think they should. Because it isn't, right? Isn't that true? Right? We have people that come to AA, and I know that when he recovers, this way of being is going to be gone, right? And here he is 5 years later, and he's still here, and he's still doing the same thing that I think it's impossible for him to do and stay sober, right? Because people never change the way I think they should change. They change the way that they find in their journey to change, through inventory, through confession, through working the rest of the steps. They change the things that they come to in the way that they come to them. And so the 4th step is where we started cataloging this. And there was some discussion after last week's meeting about the 3-column versus 5-column inventories. And I'm a big book thumper. There are 3 columns in an example inventory in the big book. There's also 3 but there's 5 columns in the inventory that the big book, well, there's at least 4 columns. I see it as 5 columns. I was taught 5 columns, and I see it as 5 columns. Of course, if you were taught 4 columns, you probably see it as 4 columns. And if you were taught 3 columns, you would probably see it as 3 columns, right? Right? But there's some discussion about this. So just the way that I see it, it doesn't make it so. It's just the way that I see it. It's the way that I was taught, and it's the way that I see it. There are 3 columns in the example inventory. 2 pages later, it asks 2 more very important questions. Write my own faults, list my own faults, and was I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, or inconsiderate, right? Those are so those can be seen as 2 more columns. And it says that right after it says, referring to our list again, right? Putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. Where were we at fault? Sounds like an addition to that inventory. Where was I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened, etc.? It sounds like an addition to that inventory. And so that's where big book thumpers come up with 5 columns. We also really only talked mainly about the resentment inventory. We talked about inventory in the context of resentments. The very first thing that we're asked to do is make a list of all of the people that we're resentful at. And I talked a lot at the very end about the timing of this inventory, the time, how long maybe you should be sober before you take the inventory, and maybe how long it should take to do the inventory. And again, these 2 things are a matter of opinion, I say, because the big book doesn't give very specific instructions about it. But what we know from AA history is that people were doing this inventory. They were going through all 12 steps, in fact, within the first weeks of their sobriety. And they were often doing it in a matter of days If Dr. Bob was your sponsor, you went through most of it in a matter of hours. So that's not how it's going to look for you, and it's not how I did it. Okay? So let's be clear about that. It's not going to look like that for most of us. But I mention it because there's an ideal. And that ideal is that we get involved in the 12-step program as early as possible in our sobriety, as early as you're willing to, and that we go through that process thoroughly, but still as quickly as possible. My sponsor taught me that AA was implement now, perfect later. And everybody in here who has been through the 12 steps know that in the beginning, it looks like this thing that you're going to do that's going to be monumental in task and that will gotta take like forever to finish. And all of that also presumes that when we're done, well, it also presumes that there is even and when we're done, right? But anybody who's been through the 12 steps knows that when you get to a certain point, you're asked to rinse and repeat. When we get to step 10, we're going to be asked to rinse and repeat, right? Everything pretty much from there is going to be rinse and repeat. We're going to be asked to do what we learned in the first 9 steps over and over and over again. And so implement now, perfect later. Do the very best that you can. Do the very best you can. And I'm not saying don't be thorough. I'm just saying that I've watched a lot of people and I've helped a lot of people do an inventory. I've helped a lot of people get through the steps the first time. And the ones who do this rather quickly and rather early in sobriety seem to grasp the program a little bit better than those who don't, in my opinion. They get something that takes. Take my own experience. My own experience is I made this thing a monumental task. It took me months to do my first 4 steps. This is before I ever went to a big book study, before I ever understood how powerless I was, and so that whole experience is askew a little bit. But how I was participating was not consistent with, let's say, the first 100 who wrote the book Alcoholics Anonymous outlining their experience, right? And I feel that the results equally didn't follow theirs, right? And so we're in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous. The program Alcoholics Anonymous has a textbook. That's what they called it, not me. They call it a textbook. A textbook is a certain type of book, right? It's a book that explains or departs information from the mind of one or more to the minds of others, building on information as you go. And so the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous, the textbook even says, it's going to show us specifically, precisely, exactly, and with clear-cut directions how to work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you're in AA and you think this is a program of, well, however your sponsor does it is best, I don't want to be the guy that tells you don't listen to your sponsor. I really don't want to be that guy. That's not me. I don't want to be that guy. But there is a textbook in Alcoholics Anonymous that explains the results. We read these promises, which are really cute. At the end of a lot of meetings, we read the promises, right? But the promises are the results of following directions, right? If we're expecting the results that the first 100 got, if we're looking for the results that the first 100 got, it might be necessary to follow the instructions that the first 100 laid out for us. That's what I mean to impart. Nobody in AA, with that being said, nobody in AA has a right to tell anybody else in AA that they're doing it wrong. Everybody in AA is free to interpret the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Even Bill writes reasonable approach and interpretation. I know that sounds confusing and maybe even contradictory. I'm just saying that there's the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous where nobody has a right to tell anybody else what to do. And then there's a program of Alcoholics Anonymous that's in the book. If what you're looking for are the results the book promises, I'm suggesting very strongly you follow the directions that the book lays out, right? Let me just leave that there. The book lays out the inventory the resentment inventory, the fear inventory, the sex inventory, asking us to catalog these things, coming back each time to where I have been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened, right? What instincts have caused me to act certain ways or react certain ways is in that third column of the inventory. That's in the example inventory. And the primer for that third column in the inventory is best described as being in the 12 and 12. Where Bill had more information 12 years later, wrote the 12 and 12, and gave us great insight into what he was talking about with respect to these three basic instincts: the instinct for the social instinct, the security instinct, and the sex instinct, and our ambitions for all three of those. And so as I'm writing this inventory, there's a couple of things happening. Number one, all of this stuff that's been running my life, right, up here, stays confused and combobulated, and it's easy to rationalize and justify. As long as it's like running around here in my head, it's really just a swamp of messy information. Some of it true, some of it not, but I don't even know the difference. That's right. That's really what it is. On paper, it doesn't look that way at all. On paper, it looks factual, and, well, in my case, pathetic and even petty. Honestly, like it looked petty and pathetic. It was like these things that were so big in my head that I had to hate you or be afraid of you. You know, when I saw what I was so upset about on a piece of paper, most of the time it was nothing. Most of the time it was nothing, and even the ones that were something were like, yeah, but look at me. You know, you come over here and that was the second thing. Like so the first thing that happens is this stuff that has all a mushy swamp in my head looks much clearer on paper, and it doesn't resemble the way that it presents itself in my head when I'm using it as a justification to be use the expletive that's up there already. I don't have to say it. And the second thing that happened to me, especially coming to Alcoholics Anonymous as a very young man, I had never really taken responsibility for anything in my life. I felt like my life was an effect of everyone else. And looking at the fourth step and filling out the fourth column, what we call the fourth column, the column where I write what I did to the other people, my inventory. Filling out that column, filling out what I did that often set the ball rolling, what I often did that caused other people to react the way that they did, and then me get so pissed off at them for acting that way when I caused it in the first place, right? That's what most of my inventory is actually showing on the fourth column. It's the first time I ever took responsibility for things in my life. It's the first time I ever saw, oh no, this is all me. And I could see it coming as I was filling out the first three columns. I knew it was coming. Like I could see it. I was like, oh my God, I knew it. I know because I already knew. I already had the instructions. I already knew what the fourth column was going to ask me. And as I'm filling out the first three columns, I can already see, oh my God, this is my fault. And so I had the wrong question. I was like the guy who runs around going, oh, why is life so unfair? Why is my life such a mess? Well, that's the wrong question. The real question is not a question at all. It's, of course, my life is such a mess. Of course it is the way that it is. How could it be any other way given who I've been? Given who I've been, how could it have been any other way? And the fifth step, finally, we're 20 minutes left of the meeting. Almost intentionally, because I couldn't talk an hour on step 5. But the fifth step is, and by the way, the fourth step we found out, see, I'm still not on step 5. The fourth step we also found out, right, one of the reasons why some of us take so very long to do it is because the word thoroughly was in there, right? And some of us interpret the word thorough as perfect, right? You say thorough, I hear perfect, right? And so I want to wait and take weeks and months and years until my inventory has absolutely everything that should ever be there on it, right? And I've sponsored people who had previously taken months and even years to do a fourth step. Even they would say, as soon as they were done with step 5, they thought of more things to add to their fourth step. Nobody has ever done the perfect fourth step. It's never happened in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm willing to wager that it's never happened. Nobody has ever done a perfect fourth step. And so implement now, perfect later. Do the very best you can in the sitting, right? Start and finish it in a short period of time, because guess what? In a few steps, you're going to have the opportunity to do it again and again and again, and it won't matter whether or not it was complete the first time in the smallest bit, right? So we take the fourth step and we go to step 5, and the step 5 is is nothing more than sharing that fourth step with another person. It's opening up and having that inside conversation, because that stuff that I wrote in that fourth step, that's still just locked up with me, right? And there's power already, because I see myself very, very differently. I look at this life that I've lived and these gripes that I've had, and I can finally see, oh wow, this would not even be the case had I not been this person. Right? But that does not unlock the power to change. It is getting that inside conversation outside and being authentic. And for me, it was like the first authentic, intimate conversation that I ever had with another man, where I told him exactly because and I had done a fifth step prior to this using a Hazelden guide, fourth step, which was, I'm sure, valuable. But this one, not only because some of the stuff was the same, like some of the things that I shared with both men. Were things I never would have thought to share prior to that. But this was more than that. This wasn't just sharing those, because that became like not the big deal. The big deal wasn't that I was sexually molested by my male adult neighbor. That was not the big deal, right? The big deal was the petty reasons why I did some of the things that I did, and the petty and pathetic reason why I was so upset with some of the people that I was so upset with. That was the more embarrassing thing. The more embarrassing thing was the reveal that I had been making these mountains out of molehills because I'm actually a pretty shallow, pathetic person. That was the big reveal in my fifth step. And so that stuff became, because that stuff goes much closer to home. That's much more revealing about who I am and how I had been living life up to that point. And especially because at that point in my first fifth step out of the big book, I didn't know yet anything different. I was revealing how it is, not even knowing, not really. I mean, I had the promise of a new way of life. I had the promise of a completely new life, and I believed that promise was that was possible at this point. But I'm still revealing how it is, not how it was. It's a lot easier to reveal how it was, but it's a lot harder to actually be real with somebody in the moment about how it really is, especially when it's not pretty, especially when it's embarrassing. So the fifth step was humbling, but it was the first time that inside conversation matched the outside conversation. It was the first time the Brian that I am and the Brian that I portray were exactly the same. And it was like a monkey lifted off my back in more than one way. I'm not one of these guys that came home from my fifth step and on the drive home had a massive spiritual experience. That's not where it happened for me. Mine was a much slower educational variety where there's no distinct point where that experience happens. Unlike some people who have a dramatic spiritual experience right at the end of step 5. Many people do. Some have it at the end of step 3. Some have it halfway through 9. Mine was much more gradual. It took me not just going through the steps, but continuing to practice them as a way of life before I think the change came over me. But I'll tell you this, coming back from doing my fifth step with my sponsor was a line where I told you when I told my sponsor I was in step 3, he said, "We'll see," right? Even I was like, "We'll see." I'm not a guy who follows through on a lot of the things that I commit to doing, especially when they're really good for me or really important for me to do. I don't know why that is. But this was one of those times where I not only made a commitment to myself and to other people that I was going to do this 4th and 5th step thoroughly, but I did 4th step and the 5th step thoroughly. And on the other side, I knew I was on a journey home. I knew that I was on the path. I knew that that monkey was off my back. I actually felt like a genuine and worthy member of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, probably for the first time, right? Because I had finally done this thing that, and followed the directions in AA's text. I felt really good about that. I followed the directions in the text, and I felt like I was on my way home. I felt like I was finally a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing, that I had done this thing. The 5th step is a step that, and again, I'm going to start talking about these steps. I usually wait until 6 and 7 to start doing this, but I did it last week and I'm going to do it now. We talk about these steps all the time as these individual things, like they're separate individual things to be done. But what we find when we get to step 10 is that they're not. So the big secret that I'm going to let out of the bag now about step 10 is that step 10 asks us to do 4 through 9 all the time. That's what step 10 is. It's really nothing more than that. It's do steps 4 through 9 all the time, every day, as a way of life. That's what step 10 is. And so there's 2 contexts then of doing the steps, because one of them is writing out that 4th step and doing my 5th step and moving on to step 6, right? That's one big thing. That's a huge hurdle that, most of us, hey, listen, a lot of people who come to Alcoholics Anonymous and sit in meetings just like this one every single day never get through those 2 steps, to be honest, right? If we're honest with ourselves, many people never even get that far. But those that do are usually well on their way, right? Wow, there was a whole thought that was going to follow that. But that's just the first time. I got it. It takes me a minute sometimes. The truth of the matter is that inventory today is just as important. It's important, because in the context of step 10, the steps of asking me to do this every day on a regular basis, to be mindful of my inventory, to be mindful of where and how I'm selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened, where these instincts are astray, and deal with those things appropriately instead of acting out in ways that are selfish and dishonest and harmful to others and myself. And the sad thing is about inventory taking is that it constantly reveals that I hurt the people that I love. That's the truth, right? But if I want to be the person that if I want to be better, and if I want to live a better life, then I need to see those things and hopefully see them before I act the ways that I'm typically finding that I act. So to get it from action to attitude to thoughts is a process that some of us work at for a long time in order to start correcting the thinking before we have the attitude, that's the whole point of step 10, is to have that happen in the thinking stages so that we're not acting out in the ways that we do.